What's up everyone, it's me, Wisens, back at it again with another video. Well, that's what I would say if this wasn't my first video. Welcome everyone to my new channel where I will be taking you through my game dev journey, where I strive to learn as much as I can and perhaps one day make a full functional game. So, ready to get started? Let's get into it. So my first attempt at creating a game, I should probably start small. So I looked through some beginner level tutorials and ended up deciding on the game engine called Godot. And from there, I followed a tutorial from a YouTuber that goes by the name of Brackeys. If you haven't heard of him, go check him out. There's some great stuff there. I followed along with Brackeys and started with the player character. Now when it comes to Godot, it uses a system called nodes, which are the building blocks that you can use to make your game. Here you can see I'm using a character body 2D node, which will allow me to create something that all good player characters should have. Things such as moving, attacking, and interacting with objects. Now this node on its own isn't enough. After all, we need to be able to see the player. So in order to do this, I will be giving our player a sprite, which is the same thing as a 2D image. And after a bit of fiddling, voila, our player can be seen now. Brackeys was kind enough to provide a free asset pack that comes with sprites, so I'll be using that. Here you can see the knight sprite sheet provided, which we will be using for our player. As you can see, the sprite sheet contains just what we need for our player sprite. Here you can see me adjusting the default values a bit, and I increased them so that the grid here fits with the sprites. I'm going to continue on with the tutorial and I'll see you in a bit. Alright, so here we are about 1 hour later and we have a small scene with the player character that can move and jump. And here's a small map that the player can explore. Now it doesn't look like much, but there's a script that allows us to control the player. Now I must confess that as I got deeper into this, I was a little scared. Why? Math. Now I was a programmer before starting my game dev journey, and math was the reason why I stayed as a web developer. It hurts my tiny web developer brain. Well, we're starting simple enough though, so this wasn't too bad. Something that I had to learn quickly was a little something called delta. As you can see, I am multiplying gravity here by delta. The reason for this is because delta is basically what keeps the speed of the game, or frames per second, in check by ensuring that the character moves at the same speed no matter what. It uses a system that is honestly a bit too complex for me at the moment. Here we can see the character flying across the screen when we don't multiply by delta. Now that I have finished Brackeys' tutorial, I'd like to add on to what we currently have. I have a few ideas in mind, such as weapons, power-ups, and levels. I decided to tackle the weapon first, so I downloaded a free asset pack that contains various weapons. Let's go with the sword here. So I want to make the sword swing, similar to another game called Terraria. In that game, the sword swings from up to down in front of the player. So let's get started. The sword isn't going to swing itself. Now we have an attack that can damage enemies. The way I did this was by adding a rotation to the sword. It took a bit of trial and error to get the speed and positioning right, but with some help from the Godot documentation, I was able to get it to work the way I wanted. Now the Godot documentation is where every aspect of Godot is explained. Godot goes above and beyond by going quite in depth with everything. Here we can see that we have a function dedicated to damaging enemies. This was quite tricky for me because I was having a bit of an issue trying to figure out just exactly how to find the enemy from the script in the first place. So I ended up creating this line here, and in the enemy script there is a piece of code here for taking damage. The reason this works is because I am able to get the parent, in this case it's the enemy, and call the take damage piece of code if it exists. This is called whenever an area enters the area of the sword. This was the hardest part of the sword for me. I wanted to have it so that the enemies are knocked back whenever they are hit. I kept running into an issue where if the enemy was inside of the sword, the enemy would fly towards the character, which is not something I wanted. So I subtracted this from the enemy position, which causes the enemy to fly away from the player no matter where it is. As stated before, I have a tiny web developer brain, so I borrowed this helpful piece of code that saved the day. In addition, I added a health system, so the players and enemies have 3 life in total, and each hit takes off 1. Here we can see that a heart goes away each time that we get hit, and the enemies die in 3 hits as well. Now onto the shield. So this shield is one of the power-ups, and once the player grabs it, the shield goes around the player in a circle and hits anything in its path. You can see it here hitting the enemy and applying knockback as well. I'm pretty proud of this one because this was a pain for me to get working. The spin is actually just using trigonometry to allow it to spin in the circular path. And you know what that means? Well, let's just say Google became my best friend for an entire night. The shield also has a time limit as well. Once the timer is up, the shield will disappear. This is an interesting one because I had trouble linking the shield with the power-up timer. It took a bit of finagling, but I eventually figured out a solution. Now the final thing I added was levels. In order to do that, I created a system that will increment the level number by 1. And this will happen whenever the player enters the exit, which is marked here by the Godot logo. Whenever the player enters it, this piece of code here will run. What this does is get the current level's file name, which I conveniently named level 1, and increment the 1 in the file to 2. Then it will look for the level name that has a 2 in it and send the player to that level. I am pretty proud of this one, if I do say so myself. And now, the grand finale. After a few days of hard work, this is what the finished product looks like. The player can move and attack. The shield power-up works, and there's multiple levels. I feel good about what I was able to accomplish so far in these last few days, and hope to continue with the next project. I've been putting off game dev for quite a while now, and now that I've finally gotten into it, I can say it is quite fun. Alright, well that about wraps up the video for today. I hope you enjoyed the journey as much as I did, and I plan on making more videos showcasing my dev journey. And with that, I'll see you next time.